All right, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Ground Control. We've got David Fivecoat as our guest today. I'm really excited to have David here. David served 24 years in the United States Army. David's also got a tremendous amount of experience really helping to enhance and teach people leadership skills and to help companies improve in their execution. He's the author of a book and soon to be a second book. We'll talk a little bit more about that. David's a really fantastic guy as well. You can see in his background, he's also a cyclist. So we'll cover a bunch of those different things. But David, welcome to Ground Control today. It's great to have you.
Perry, thanks for having me on Ground Control. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, I think that there's an interesting part that I didn't share yet about some of the things that you've been doing as part of your leadership training, and that is traveling to different battle sites all over the world. You recently were at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in Montana. So, yeah, before we get into that a little bit, I want to talk about just your general program, right? And how you decided to start visiting battle sites with leadership groups and taking them through those, because now it's been both in the US and in Europe. So what caused you to first decide you're going to start taking groups all over the world and taking them to these famous battlegrounds?
Yeah, so I guess we got to roll it back just a little bit. I attended the United States Military Academy at West Point and graduated with a degree in military history. And I love military history. That was one of the main reasons to go to West Point was the idea of, actually going to attend the place where a bunch of the World War II generals had also attended, like Patton and Eisenhower and Bradley. One of the things that the military did, the U.S. Army does, and we actually stole it from the Prussian Army, which is the predecessor of the German Army, was this idea of a staff ride. And the German Army in the late 1800s said, hey, we haven't fought a war in a while. We need to figure out a way that we can teach our officers and leaders about war because we haven't experienced it. And what they hit upon was taking folks to Napoleonic battles and talking through the decisions and communication and other challenges that those folks, both on the French side and the German side or the Prussian side, experienced. And they used that as a great training tool. The U.S. Army adopted it as well, continued to use it all the way up until when I served, which was from 1993 to 2017. When I retired in 2017, I had the opportunity to go work for another company that took corporate groups to battlefields. And it was an ideal job. I got to, one, talk about military history, which I love. And then second, which I love even more, which is helping grow and develop leaders using some Army leadership principles and leadership ideas. In 2020, COVID hit. I ended up starting my own company in 2020, got into some executive coaching. And then in 2024, I started taking my own clients to battlefields. And so this is our third year of taking folks to battlefields. Like you said earlier, but we just came out of Montana with the Battle of Little Bighorn, which is where Custer meets his ultimate demise. And, we're going to end up doing, we will have done over 20 battlefields here by the end of the year.
How long do you spend out there in each one of these battlefields typically?
Yeah, so the typical model is, and we'll use I'll use generically Monday through Wednesday for a corporate group, but the corporate group has to arrive at the hotel, which we base out of by 5:00 on Monday. We do a working dinner where we present a strategic overview, help folks understand the battle a little bit better, and then we transition into one of the leadership concepts that we're going to teach and use on the battlefield. We spend all day on Tuesday out on the battlefield. And when we come back to the hotel at the end of the day, before we go to dinner, we do a after action review, which is another military concept and process to capture lessons learned from that day on the battlefield, because we want those folks to take the leadership ideas back and be able to apply them the next day when they get back from work. Then typically we do a half day on Wednesday We'll go back out on the battlefield in the morning, or we may do some work in the conference room of actual applying some of the stuff to some of their work challenges. And we tend to wrap up after a working lunch and an after action review around 1 o'clock so folks can go catch their flight back and be back at work on Thursday. That model seems to work for most companies, but we're open to change it. I'm working on a program right now that's just a 1-day program for a person that we've done some work for before, because they just didn't have as much time to dedicate to it. But that's kind of our model.
So for the Prussians, it makes complete sense going out to Napoleonic battlefields. We're talking about training soldiers, taking people like me, office workers, and pulling them out on the battlefield. How much different is that than sitting in a conference room or on a board table or something like that and trying to run the same exercises? What do you find ends up being like a big differentiator that drives additional value for them to be out on the battlefield itself?
Well, I'm willing to bet. Well, I'll throw a question back to you. How many, over the course of your career, how many keynote speakers on leadership do you think you sat through in your corporate career?
Dozens, if not hundreds at this point.
And how many can you actually recall and provide one idea that they gave you that you've used?
Not that many. Honestly, there's a couple that do stand out, but out of all the different keynotes that I've sat through, I think probably it'd be like 2 or 3% that I'm actually remembering anything significant from.
Well, so last year I did Gettysburg program with a corporate leader whose name's Benny. He brought his team to Gettysburg, and he brought his team to Gettysburg because he had done a Gettysburg program with me 6 years ago. And he said, hey, this is the only leadership training that I have referenced over the last 6 years. And my team's changed. We've got new people. And so I want to bring this team there so we continue to have that kind of impact. The battlefield programs are sticky. First off, you're going to be on a historic site. You'll be standing outside, and you will be actually standing where Joshua Chamberlain ordered the bayonet charge on Little Round Top, which sort of saved the day for the Union Army on July 2nd, 1863. So that's the first thing that makes it different. And then we're going to throw some ideas at you from military leadership, which is slightly different from what you may have seen from corporate leadership. But those ideas, we have taken them and made sure that they are applicable in a corporate environment. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of those two things, of being on a place where somebody actually made some really tough decisions under extreme pressure, and then getting a little bit of a new idea of a leadership idea or a leadership concept. And at Gettysburg, on where Joshua Chamberlain ordered the bayonet charge, we do leading in crisis. And we talk about the 6 factors that are important if you are ever leading a team in crisis, which Joshua Chamberlain epitomized on that day in 1863. And that is why that kind of stuff is memorable. And then we try to lock in that leadership idea with our after action reviews at the end of the day. And then finally, when our wrap up happens on that Wednesday, we also ask everybody to commit to using one of the new ideas that they were given on the battlefield when they go back. And so we work really hard at TFCG to try to make it as sticky as possible, so those ideas stay with the team and they use those ideas going forward.
Makes a lot of sense. In Gettysburg, it's I think it's a great forum. Little Bighorn is it's a pretty brutal leadership case study, right? So, Custer's working on incomplete intelligence. Reno's losing control in the opening minutes, and meanwhile, Sitting Bull's built a decentralized coalition of a bunch of other tribes that are working in coordination. So, what made you choose the Battle of Little Bighorn as one of the places to take and teach these lessons? Is it a place where you're taking companies that are needing to do a massive turnaround or taking on the biggest challenges in their existence? What's the draw?
So I really like the Battle of Little Bighorn. I think a lot of folks fancy themselves as almost a Custer-esque kind of leader. Remember, Custer at that point in time was one of the most famous leaders that came out of the Civil War. He was present on every major battle. He was promoted from captain to one-star general at age 24. He's one of the youngest general officers. And then for the next 10 years after the Civil War, he's the most famous Indian fighter in the nation. And so he is, this larger than life, charismatic figure, bold, dashing, audacious. And he goes into this battle, and the things that he was always able to do don't work anymore. And the Native Americans change what they've done for the last 10 years on the plains. And Custer cannot see that fast enough. And, I know we're going to talk a little bit later about change and AI and stuff. And so it is a perfect metaphor for talking about AI and changing situations. The other thing that I didn't understand until you get out there and walk the ground is it is not a tabletop or a pool table. It is a series of valleys and ridges and a river, and you're like, how could Custer do this? And you get out there and you stand where he stood, and you still can't see where the Native American village would be. He's spread out over 3 miles from east to, from where Reno and Benteen eventually set up defensive positions. And he's trying to do the same things that has worked against Native Americans, and Sitting Bull has put together a coalition. You might call it a team of teams. He's leading indirectly. He provided a broad vision and guidance to the team, and they decide to fight differently. And so there's so many, useful lessons that, your clients or other folks out there in the corporate arena can take away from the Little Bighorn.
I love that you bring that part up because, the idea was we'd eventually get around to, but I think we just talk about it now, right? AI and a lot of the folks that we work with are experiencing like significant change around them, right? And it's not maybe a battlefield, but it probably feels from day to day like the challenges are rising to levels that they haven't experienced before, and opportunities, right? And so that's part of it, is that we have with AI both a lot of challenges that businesses are confronting, and we have a lot of opportunities that they're now able to take advantage of. If Custer is staying in just the same things that he learned and practiced before, and the Native Americans were trying new techniques, love to think about that from an AI perspective, right? So you reference the OODA, observed, orient, disconnect, right? How would you apply or tell people we can apply those concepts and some of the things that you've learned from that Little Bighorn to some of the challenges that people are experiencing in their business that are rising, the opportunities and sometimes the challenges of AI?
Okay. Well, let me talk for a second about the OODA loop. And that's, you mentioned it before. It was originally created by John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot that was a fighter pilot in the Korean War. And his idea was, it was really an idea to teach fighter pilots on how to dogfight better. And the idea is, first you observe the environment, then you orient on the environment based on your historic framework and models, and then you make a decision, and then you act on that decision. And so that's the OODA loop. And the idea, it has taken from that original idea of, hey, this is a great idea for fighter pilots and how to dogfight better, and has expanded on anybody that is trying to do things that involve time. And and so the idea of an OODA loop is anybody that is trying to outpace the competition by changing or evolving faster, the OODA loop has some utility for them. It is a great tool to think about problems that involve time, not just military problems or dogfighting. And so I'll take it to the Custer analogy, and then I'll try to do a corporate analogy as well. So Custer, one of the things that he did better during the Civil War than anybody else was he had a very fast OODA loop, and he could outthink the enemy and make decisions faster than they could. And in this case, when he's at the Little Bighorn, he observes what the Native Americans are doing. He orients them on them, but he uses a flawed model because he doesn't realize that rather than running away, which has been the problem of the U.S. cavalry on the plains since the end of the Civil War, is hey, we can't get the Indians to stand and fight, and so we need to always try to be operating like they're going to run away, and
Mhm.
so that's his mental model, and he applies that, and he tries to divide his forces. He has about a third of the Seventh Cavalry, and he divides the forces in two to try to get to either end of the Native Americans and catch them in sort of a two-prong attack. What he doesn't realize is that the Native Americans aren't running away and they're standing and fighting. And so when he divides his forces and makes that decision and he acts on it, he just divides his forces into smaller amounts, which then enable the Native Americans to overwhelm and kill the 245 soldiers of the 7th Cav that die there in Montana on that day. So does that make sense as far as the OODA loop and how it applies out there in Montana?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's a really interesting thing. So the fact that it ties in so much to time, right? And for a lot of folks in the RFP space, right? AI's big introductions, both the capability to get more RFPs answered quickly, but there are obviously people on the opposite side that are using AI to create more RFPs and more RFP questions. But it's not about answering RFPs. Ultimately, the big effort is around winning sales opportunities. And what I've heard time and time again, from folks at sales leadership positions, time kills deals, right? So it's always comes down to the capability to work within significant time constraints. I've got to imagine that that's a similar issue for a lot of the other businesses that you work with, right? That time is a massive constraint on the opportunity they have to improve and change their business, to pursue new opportunities. How do you walk people through some of these battlefield lessons, the OODA loop and the capability to figure out ways to optimize time and to tackle the big challenges at the same time?
Yeah. So I guess, I start from, I'm a small business. I'm trying to, win sales. I'm trying to be, faster and more nimble than the competition. And, it is challenging because it's tough. That whole orient part of the OODA loop is challenging because do you use the past model to orient
Hmm.
on things and do it the same old way, or do you go ahead and use some sort of AI tool to also help you? I am still convinced at this point in time, at least I I use both the Chat GPT and Claude, that they are good, but they aren't great. And for the most part, when I use those tools to write things,
Hmm.
that I end up having to go back through and edit it because, for instance, ChatGPT tends to add where it's a 4 sentence paragraph. They add a fifth sentence that is redundant to the fourth sentence, and
Hmm.
unless you're reading it as a human, it sounds good, but it would sound better if you cut down to 4 sentences rather than 5 sentences. I don't know if that's something that you guys see, but it's something that I see as I try to use AI as a tool to help me be a better business.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely it's we talk about cognitive load, right? Of a lot of the AI tooling where it creates what can look incredibly good, right? But there still needs to be a human in the loop, and in a lot of cases, you need to have a human's persuasive capability to really think about intent in replying to an RFP or preparing a sales proposal. On the intent side, right? Leader's intent is one of the big lessons that you teach. Think about this from the perspective of RFP teams and RFP managers. they are leading the charge across a wide group of people that don't report into them. And typically under incredible time constraints, and typically they're trying to get people to do stuff while they've got other things to do. If there's one thing that you were able to pass on to folks, whether they're actually in a leadership role or they're just taking charge and helping to direct that activity, there's one thing you can do one thing you can teach them, it helps them to keep the team fractured. What would that be?
So the leader's intent is it's a great tool that folks can steal from the military. The way that I teach it is it's comprised of three components: a purpose statement, which is a why statement; a key tasks, which are just like it sounds, key tasks, and then an end state. What does success look like at a future point in time? And a couple things for folks to take away as they lead their RFP teams. The first thing is it's a great bumper sticker to really think about how do we convey the important information to the team. The first one is you're going to align the team around whatever that purpose statement is. And most corporate groups that I have worked with struggle to write a good why statement, because a good why statement enables somebody to make a decision when you aren't around. And so, for instance, a good one might be, hey, we want to win, this RFP. That might be. And so folks know that, hey, if I'm not doing the lowest cost or I'm not writing this in the right way that's going to result in the sale, I can make those decisions. So it's aligned there. And I know that's sort of a broad kind of thing. Key task can be, hey, we need to write the RFP. We need to make sure that we run the numbers. So we're going to make a profit off of this, and, a couple other could be key tasks. End state, what does success look like? Hey, by July 1st, or we'll say August 1st, 2026, our company has successfully won this RFP would be a great end state for aligning a team. The biggest things out of those three things with an RFP leader that's trying to help their team win that RFP is writing and spending some intellectual energy on crafting a good purpose statement. We often write purpose statements. We call them purpose statements, but they're really how or what statements, because they're telling folks how to do it. They're not enabling folks, as conditions change and as the environment changes, to make good decisions. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is writing a good end state. I say that the two things out of a good end state, which help convey your vision to help move the team forward, is a date in time in the future and how we're going to measure our success or not success. I know corporate groups are sometimes reluctant to do that because that's a risk, and I understand that. I also am a big fan of only one metric, but I also know that corporate groups also struggle with one metric. And so I'm a realist. And hey, you can say, hey, we're going to, we want to obtain 10% profit, 10% revenue growth, or whatever numbers that you want. But those are the things that I think a leader could take away from our conversation today and apply them into trying to bring that RFP team together that is an ad hoc organization that needs to be aligned on purpose and needs to know the direction that they're going. If they could give them the purpose and the end state and they've put some intellectual energy into it, I think they'll be surprised at what their team can accomplish.
It's interesting because we think so much about the team, and I think a lot of the folks that work inside of sales ops, a lot of folks that are working in rev ops and RFP response teams, they're thinking about the greater good of the company and those company objectives a lot of the time. And they're working under such tremendous pressure driven timelines that a lot of times, when we get a chance to talk to them, we start to learn about them individually that they don't get as much time to spend on developing themselves. And leadership skills, whether you're an individual contributor and you're just figuring out ways to do ad hoc leadership in an effort, or whether your actual role inside the company is managing a team of people, are tremendously valuable. You've worked with a number of the folks inside of Rocket Docs to help them advance their own capabilities and skills. what are some of the things that you think that people can apply in daily practice to improve how they lead teams, whether on an ad hoc basis or formally as a manager?
I'll use an outside the rocket doc enterprise story.
Sounds good.
So Joshua Chamberlain, who we talked about earlier, is he's played by Jeff Daniels in the movie Gettysburg. He was a professor of rhetoric from Bowdoin College. The thing that he was really good at was he acknowledged that he was not a professional soldier, and he worked really hard to learn how to be the best professional soldier that he. When we're at Little Round Top, I will ask the group, "Hey, what's a good leadership book or management book that you've read in the last 12, 24 months?" And it's I have been disappointed that you tend to, in a group of 10, maybe one or two people have actually done any self-study on developing their own leadership tools. And I get it. They're busy. They're trying to balance work and home and family and all that. And I get it. But look for ways, if you have to commute, if you're not lucky enough to work from home, there's opportunities to listen to podcasts or books on on Audible. There's all kinds of options out there as ways to do self-study to improve your leadership skills. If you think you're just going to go into work and your leadership skills will magically improve, that's the number one thing, is figure out a way to do some self-study to improve yourselves. And I think working with some of the Rocket Docs teams, that was one of the things that I brought to the relationship. Is you would have to read a chapter before a session, and then we would discuss it, and hey, and sometimes I would get it right and that would resonate with somebody, and sometimes I'd get it wrong, and that's okay. But that having that accountability, and spending an hour a week to read one article on leadership or management is invaluable to improving yourself as a leader. It's one of those things that you've got to work on, and that was one of the great things about the military, is the military acknowledged that leadership development needed to happen. And there were several stops in our career when you would get 6 months or 9 months to go to school and think about leadership, and think about how, when you go back out to the force, you would apply it. And then when you were out in the force, we would have professional development sessions on a monthly or quarterly basis where we talked about different facets of leadership. I don't think that happens as much in the corporate world. And so those things are easy things to make yourself better. So you move up that ladder, develop your leadership skills, and the business leadership, section in the bookstore or on Amazon is one of the largest ones out there, because there are a bunch of folks out there pumping out leadership books every year. And so you can, whether you like Lencioni or you want to do Jim Collins, or, any of those folks are out there that you can grab onto and take that and use that as a skill to improve your leadership. I don't know if I actually answered the question. You got me on a soapbox there, so you can come back and ask it again if I didn't answer it.
I love the fact that the answer actually is in part like, hey, take the time to do some self-study, right? But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your own book, Growing Your Grit, right? And just for anybody who's listening to this, if you're listening to the whole thing, Lexi, make sure that this part's not in the LinkedIn cuts, but people who actually listen to the whole deal. If you're in the first 20 people who send us an email or response back or repost this on LinkedIn, then we'll send you a copy of David's book.
Awesome.
But David, tell folks a little bit about your book. And to your point, there are so many books out. What made you decide to take the time to learn?
Yeah, so I joke now that the book was my COVID project, because I started writing it in the fall of 2020. It was published in June of 2021. And I had always wanted to write a book. I like to write. I think I'm, unfortunately for you during this podcast, I think I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. But and so I was struggling to figure out. I was blogging on leadership, and somebody said, "Hey, you're kind of gritty. Why don't you write a book on grit?" And I had read Angela Duckworth's book on grit. She's done some phenomenal work on grit. I don't think got it exactly right as a grit. I would call myself a grit practitioner rather than a grit theorist.
Okay.
And so I think there's a bunch of things that go into grit, but if folks out there want to get gritty or more gritty than they are and actually succeed at things, first off, they need to understand their own personal purpose. And that's one of the early chapters in the book. All the folks that I work with as coaching clients get a copy of the book. In our first session, they are given homework to come in with their personal purpose statement. And most folks haven't thought about it, about, hey, what's my why? Why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And why does that matter? And I'm pretty ruthless on this. Say your purpose statement's got to include both your work self and your home self, because if you try to have two separate ones, one's going to win out. And so you've got to do the hard work and think about what really matters to you. And then I say, okay, we're going to do some goal setting. And that's the next chapter in the book. And I think let me back up for a second on goal setting. Did you set a New Year's resolution?
I did.
Okay. Did you succeed on accomplishing your New Year's resolution?
50-50 so far. It's been
all right.
Stuck out for me, but it's not over yet.
All right. Well, good. There's that day, I think it's January 19th, which is officially New Year's Eve resolution quitting day. Supposedly, 60% of Americans do New Year's resolutions. Very few actually accomplish them. And I think one of the reasons why folks don't accomplish their New Year's resolutions is they don't do great goal setting. First off, they don't, I know it's a trope, but the SMART goals work for people, for your own personal goals. They're not just business goals, so specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. Frankly, if you only did specific, measurable, and time bound, you'd be okay. But most folks say, "Oh, I want to lose 10 pounds." Well, it doesn't have a date that you're going to do it. It doesn't have any concept on how you're going to do it. And then the other reason why I think folks fail is they don't look at the trade-offs or try to really set and go, okay, where am I finding the white, I want to go get a master's degree. Where am I going to find the white space on the calendar to do this? What am I going to give up? What am I not going to do in order to accomplish this new goal? Because we're all busy people and we've all packed our calendar full. It's not like if you've got a new goal that you've got like, I'm only working 2 hours a day, so I can fit this in, and it's not a big deal. So those things, understanding your personal purpose and then building good goals, I think are the first two key components into becoming grittier or growing your grit.
Very cool. So a follow-up question to that for you. There are a lot of folks out there that are, and it's, there's just, to your point, there's so many books, right? There's so many ideas. Have you figured out a good solid way to apply those so that it doesn't become like the 19th with the New Year's Eve resolution, where you read the book, you take the concept, you apply it for 2 or 3 days, and then it drops off?
Well, I'll talk about how we do the leader's intent. And so, we'll talk about it in the concept of, hey, this was Sitting Bull's leader's intent. This was Custer's leader's intent at Little Bighorn. And then we'll go out on the battlefield and, we may go, I'll throw it back to the clients on, hey, what was Reno's leader's intent right here? And they have to come up with an idea of what that would look like. And then we eventually get them back to the conference room on that Wednesday. And we make them write their own business leader's intent. So the idea of actually taking what we've talked about and actually doing it. And I'm a
Mm,
huge proponent of doing it. And so they
that's true.
have to do it and write it down. And I get it, they've never written one before. It's not going to be great. I get it. But you've got to start somewhere. And so I like being the accountability tool or the forcing function or whatever you want to call it, and forcing folks to actually do things, you know, you know, with the coaching clients, they have to do their personal purpose statement, and they have to do their, they have to come back with one personal and one professional goal they want to accomplish during the coaching sessions. And so that drives them forward because they actually have to do it. They're not just sitting passively and going, okay, well, I read Jim Collins' Good to Great. I can't apply the flywheel. So, I'm a big fan of making folks do it and try to put it into practice.
It's not easy to do, but it's the important part, right? And to your point, there's a lot of great stuff out there with big ideas, but the capability to actually put them into play is a whole different challenge. There's another one that you've taken on that is kind of a big challenge. I imagine that you had to set goals and timelines. So you just finished the rough draft of Work for Fighting Men, which is a historical fiction novel about the 69th Infantry Regiment during World War I.
Yes.
And that's, I guess, going to be coming out when? In the spring?
I hope in the spring of 27.
Okay.
So I really loved World War II, and continue to love World War II history.
Yeah.
And I did the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and fought all the way up to Mosul. And then I came out on a list to go to what was called the Command and General Staff College, which is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. It's a year-long course. It's for majors. I'd just gotten promoted to major. And so I left Iraq and went to Leavenworth. And while they were there, they offered an opportunity to earn a master's degree, and you had to write a master's thesis. And so I wrote a master's thesis on the 165th Infantry in World War I, trying to see if they were as good a unit as some of the other World War I units that are supposed to be, good for their time. The argument worked for the first 5 battles that the 165th was in, and it falls apart at Meuse-Argonne when they kind of get thrown into the line at the last minute, and they're not able to put all the things into place to make them successful, and they take huge amounts of casualties. And so I didn't know anything about World War I. It was a dumb decision because I hadn't done any of the background reading on World War I. And so I spent the first 3 months, every moment that I wasn't doing stuff for the course, reading World War I history books so I could get up to speed. And then I should have done it on World War II because I already had the background information. But I was like, I've already done World War II. I should do World War I. I want to learn something new. This is good. My free time suffered for that. But interestingly, because I did the master's thesis, the government hangs the master's thesis online. And there's somebody out there that's whole business model is they take the master's theses and republish them. They do a print on demand and republish them. And so you can go buy it's called Fine Conduct Under Fire. It was the master's thesis. You can get it on Amazon. I think the guy has maybe sold 5 over the 10 years I've tracked him, but I don't get any money for it because that's his whole business model is selling these master's theses when he puts a cover on it and ships it out. And I was like, well, I really enjoyed that unit, and the Grow Your Grit book works great, but it isn't a lead in into the battlefield stuff, which I really like. It's more of a lead in for the executive coaching stuff that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how can I, write something, write a second book, which I've been playing around with for a while. It's been 5 years since I published the other one. And so I was like, well, maybe I could take that master's thesis and rework it. And one of the reasons why I really liked Gettysburg is, Shahara wrote the book Killer Angels, which was the Pulitzer Prize winner for 1970, got made into the movie Gettysburg in 1993. And I was like, how can I do a historic fiction book that sort of ties into what I'm doing with the battlefield stuff? And so, wait, I could go revisit what I did in 2003 and 2004 and turn it into a historic fiction book. So the Work for Fighting Men, it comes from a poem written by Joyce Kilmer, who was the most famous poet in America he wrote a poem called Trees in 1913, makes him the most famous poet. He's part of the unit. Bill Donovan, who goes on to found the OSS, is a battalion commander. He earns the Medal of Honor in charge of the unit. And so it's got these amazing characters that are part of the story. And I got really deep into researching these guys, and there's a whole bunch of books out there, and there's been some other books that have been published since I wrote my thesis. So I've been going through them. A guy wrote a book on Father Duffy, who's, if you're ever in Times Square, there is a statue to Father Duffy in Times Square, who's the chaplain, the priest for the regiment during the war. But he's there in Times Square. But a guy wrote a book on his experience during World War I, and so it's been fun to get back into it and revisit it 20 years later. I've got 20 years different perspective on things, and I'm trying to write a fiction book but I want to be, it's a historic fiction book, so I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. So that all being said, my daughter and I just spent 10 days in Europe. We did 4 days in Berlin, a day in Strasbourg, and she said, I want to go for hikes in Europe. And I said, there's a couple of World War I battlefields that would be great to go for hikes on. So we hiked around the Battle of the Ourcq and the Battle of St. Mihiel, and I realize I have to go back in and change a few things because I got it wrong in the rough draft. Well, like they can't see from this one area where I thought they could see where the German lines were. It doesn't work, and so I got to go back in and change it so it's historically accurate. But it's been fun. I got 85,000 words, 27 chapters, and I think we said earlier, I'm an iterative writer, and so I will keep, chiseling away at it till it's decent, and then we'll see if we can get it through a real editor and get it published.
There you go. It's applying your approach and your technique to accomplish a goal. That's great.
Right. I have to demonstrate some grit to actually publish another book.
There you go.
And if you have never, for those out there that are like, hey, I would love to publish a book, it is, if you're listening, I'm happy to jump on a call. I've done it with other folks and talk you through all the things that you shouldn't do that I made mistakes on. It is a slog, and you have to have an incredible amount of perseverance to get a book done. And so I applaud anybody else that's out there that has put a book together.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So as we get towards the end here, I want to make sure that people know exactly how to get in touch with you, how to work with Fivecoat Consulting Group, go on battlefield experiences, whether it's executive coaching or even if they just, want to find your book. So what's the best way for them to find you? How do you like to be contacted?
Yeah. So the first way is the website. It's the fivecoatconsultinggroup.com. It's got links to the book. It's got ways to reach out and contact me about battlefields or executive coaching, and I'd love to do that. If you can't remember that, I know it's a mouthful, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on there as both David Fivecoat and the Fivecoat Consulting Group, so you can find it either way. Send me a DM that way, and I'm happy to set up a call and we can talk about doing coaching or taking your group to a battlefield. But those are the two main ways to get a hold of me.
Exceptional. Okay, so we close out every episode the same way with everybody. We make the floor is yours. So any word of guidance that you have, anything you want to leave the audience with, this is an opportunity for you to do so.
I really appreciated the opportunity to come on the podcast and be part of ground control. I guess the thing that I that's worth reiterating is, take the opportunity to study and and enable yourself to be better at being a better leader.
Mm.
One of the things that I did was I worked for a corporate group doing executive coaching. I did about 25 of their executives, and the two things that across the board everybody wanted their leader to be better at was communications and leader development. And so if you don't know what you can get better at, those two things are there's ample opportunity to improve your communications and improve how you develop the leaders that are under you. And there's plenty of books out there that you can take and read and then try to apply some of those ideas. And some of the ideas won't work, and that's okay. It's part of the process of getting better as a leader is taking that risk and trying something new and seeing if it works, and seeing if your team gets better at what they're doing because of the way that you're communicating or doing leader development.
Well, thank you, David. Appreciate you coming to join us. Appreciate you showing up on our ground control episode this time around. Folks, for those of you out there, and it's the Fivecoat Consulting Group, and you can find David at the website or via LinkedIn. I definitely would strongly recommend both as an executive coach for leadership development, and of course the battlefield experiences are just tremendous way to be able to go out and spend some time really working on learning and honing those leadership skills with David. So, David, thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, Perry.